have a double junk journal with me for you today. So we're going to be working on 2 of the prompts from Junk Journal January. We're going to be doing overlap in this spread, and then in another journal page we're going to be doing opaque. So for overlap, I definitely knew I wanted to do collage. I mean, I always do collage, but I feel like this prompt in particular is just so perfect for collage, and so I kind of went a little bit like maximalist with how much I was overlapping my papers. So I definitely lent into, although I kept it neutral, like I lent into a lot more different patterns and trying to overlap different textures as well, because that's something that's really interesting to work with journal pages, not only like the colors and stuff, but also the different textures, which I know probably doesn't always pick up like when you're watching it in a video, but like having brown papers and like the wrinkly packaging and tissue paper and more like textured card and things like that, like when that all comes together in a page, it gives such a nice effect. And I really like to just have all of those things create a textured spread. So this was a really fun way to play with lots of different collage papers and like different scraps as well. But you'll see as I start putting it together that I kind of just adding lots of stuff, but then also trying to work out the composition at the same time. So I kind of go back and forth on like where I want imagery and stuff like that. But at the beginning I was just focused on building up the background. So you see there I added some scrapbook paper, and what I actually did was I peeled it so that it was thinner, because obviously I didn't want the bulk necessarily of scrapbook paper. But it's also great if you want to include it in your collages and you don't want to decide between like 2 different patterns. So by doing that, not only is it like a thinner, less bulky piece of paper to collage with, but you also get the choice then of using both of the patterns. And I just thought that this soft blue would complement the brown paper that I'd added quite nicely and just create a little bit of colour. Like I do always still stick with my neutral palettes. You all know this by now if you've seen lots of my journal content, but I am trying to put a little bit of colour into it, and I definitely think this journal has a lot more like intentional pops of colour, and just kind of trying to do it in a way that's still like my own style. So just seeing how I can experiment with my collage, because yeah, that's one of my things. Like I always fall back on collage. It's definitely like a comfort zone to just be surrounded by all of the papers. I think just because there's like so much choice, and then I'm such a magpie when it comes to collecting papers. I don't know if it's just because it's like that's a junk journaling thing as well, but just like seeing random things and being like, that could be in a journal page, or collecting stuff and thinking, well, I'm gonna use that like eventually, like that might come in handy for a certain page, but not necessarily sure what it might be, so I'm just gonna add it to my ever-growing pile of papers that I've got. And then, you know, it's always really nice then when I dig something out and I think, oh look, I saved this like 2 years ago and now I'm finally using it, and it's found its home, found its like paper home within my journals, because there's just like so many different things that you can collect. That's like one of my favorite things about junk journaling. Like whenever I see like comments or things about like, you know, what should I buy to like get started, and I'm like, you can literally just use anything. Like that is the whole point. Like you can siphon through like different junk mail and magazines and newspapers and everything that you come across, and just like, I suppose you have to sort of train your eye to sort of look at it and see what its potential could be. So like looking at packaging and thinking like, are there certain patterns or certain colours? You know, you don't always have to use like the whole thing. Like could there just be like a certain section that you could cut out? I'm forever looking at like cardboard boxes, and if there's like, you know, all the like text and information about the product, but then there's like a nice little floral pattern or something that they've got going on in a corner. I often save those. I've got boxes that I've folded up from like diffusers because they've had really nice packaging around them, and I've punched them into like tabs in the past because they're cardboard, so they work quite well as tabs, so you don't always have to use them in collage as well. You can cut them into sort of like shorter little strips and fold them over the edge of your page and create like an eclectic tab in that way. There's just so many ways that you can like overlap and add all of this dimension to your junk journal pages. So you can see here I was struggling with where to put this image and I couldn't decide which part to have it on, so I'm glad that I'd originally added it with washi tape because that meant I could quite easily peel it back up and then sort of keep deciding where I wanted it. And so I was just continuing to like add stuff underneath and looking at sort of the different gaps and then maybe where I could draw different colours throughout the spread. So you'll see the sort of pinkish floral piece that I'm pushing back ever so slightly with like an overlay of tissue paper. I added the washi tape there on the right hand side to kind of pull that pink across, and it is very subtle, but I think when you have colours like that working throughout the spread, they help to just bring everything together. And you know, it doesn't have to be all singing or dancing, it can be those little like subtle touches that you can add to a collage that can really help to make it look more like you meant to put those pieces on there, you know, rather than say, oh, I've just like put a random bunch of papers. You can sort of bring things together a little bit more. So that's always what I'm trying to think about when it comes to how I like overlay my collages. So thinking about colors, thinking about like torn edges, that's just something that I like to have. I think it helps it to not look so rigid on a page. And then also with overlapping things can really help to bring out those textures and just all of the different details that you can then bring to a page by seeing the way that the different papers sort of interact with each other. So once I'd added enough collage papers to the page, I then thought, let me add something a little bit different to this. So I had added a few washi stickers, so they were a lot more translucent and still let things show through from underneath. And then I also came in just with a bit of stamping, and I didn't stamp in a way that you could see like the whole image and it was nice and crisp. I just decided to add it on the edges, so sort of overlapping in a sense, like overlapping on the edge of the page, and then you just had sections of it, and it just helped to add something different to the background and a bit of like line work here and there. So it was quite like imperfect in that way, but it just brought a nice bit of detail, I thought, to the page. And then after I'd managed to figure out where I wanted the image to go, it ended up leaving a really nice area here for adding a quote. So I just used my trusty Tombow Fudenosuke pen to do a quote here lettered out, and then I decided to add some little stars. So these little stars, I use them quite frequently actually in my Hobonichi for like my written journaling and things like that. And I think I saw them from Courtney Diaz, Little Raven Ink. She adds little stars and bits and pieces like that in her journals, and so I think they're so sweet. So I thought, actually, I've not added very many of these to my junk journals, so maybe I should add some stars. And I think they went well with the quote, but they also stood out quite nicely, I think, because I had that area of blank space there at the top of the page. So even though everything else was like pretty busy with everything that I'd added to the page, I'd managed to give myself, I think, a little bit of breathing room in that way. And here is where I'm debating. You can see whether I wanted to add a circle around the quote. I wasn't sure because I thought, oh, this is something that like I'm quite pleased with the page, and then this could potentially like spoil it, quote unquote. But I was actually really pleased with the way that it looked. I thought it really helped to bring it all together and just gave a nice sort of focal point then to that quote. So I just kind of did it a few times with the lines just to make it look a little bit more like sketchy almost. And that was my finished page for the prompt of overlap. And now I'm going to show you what I did for the prompt of opaque, and this was definitely a journey. I had one of those moments, do you know when you're creating a page and you think this is like not going to plan, it's not what I had in my head, and I was actually really worried that I wouldn't have a page that I wanted to show you all, because I'm trying so hard to, with these challenges, like stick to showing you everything that I make, because that's like the spirit of the daily challenges. And like, you know, there's always going to be like bad art or like things you don't like, but I want to just show you the whole process. But I really was thinking like I'm gonna have to do something completely different. Like I really wasn't liking this up until probably like the final part that I added to this, and then I sort of breathed a sigh of relief. So come along on this journey with me. So it started off quite nicely. I was enjoying collaging with these little paper scraps that I have in my little box where I store all of these little bits that probably should go in the bin, but I keep hold of them because I really like to make little clusters with them. And when you have all the different colours and textures and bits from different projects, they come together really nicely in a way that I enjoy working with. So my idea was I was going to build up a base of these collage papers, and then I was going to add something like opaque over the top and sort of hide part of it, and then have some of the collage showing through. So I guess you can see how I thought in my head like this would look quite impactful. And I even brought out the black paint, which I don't normally bring out black paint in this quantity, at least for my journals. And I decided to grab my jelly plate, which I don't know why. I had some block printing ink, but it clearly didn't like the way that it was sitting on the surface of the jelly plate, and you can see it's like resisting it. So despite my best efforts, like it was just doing that. And I kind of thought, well, actually that's a really cool pattern. So I grabbed some brown paper and I just thought, well, I'll take some prints of this whilst I'm here and whilst it's doing this, because I can always have that as like some extra collage fodder to use within other pages of my journal. But my idea was going to be that I would have my stencil on the jelly plate and then use the stencil to kind of block out parts of the print, and then have the rest be on the journal page. So I kind of regretted as soon as I started this. So I was just sort of making or trying to make the paint spread as evenly as I could before I then added my stencil. So you can see I was kind of being quick there. And then I don't know what I was thinking. I should have done this on a separate piece of paper, but I decided to go straight in with my journal. So please avert your eyes if you're scared about watching me put my journal straight onto this, because as soon as I did it, I thought, well, there's no going back now. So we've just got to see what it looks like. And I kept pressing down firmly, and I thought, let's get a nice print across the page, and hopefully it's not too like smushed. And then we had a very interesting, abstract, not really accurate print of the stencil on the page itself. And then I decided, well, now that I'm already in this mess, let me just do it to the other side of this page as well. So I had this sort of glassine bag, and I thought, let's put it onto there as well. And it looked equally as bad. So I just decided to kind of press it together to move some of the ink onto the other side. And I don't know, I'm kind of warming to it a little bit in terms of how abstract it looks, but you can see there by my hand gestures that I was thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? So whilst I was calming down from having made that mess within my junk journal, I just decided to use the leftovers from the print and just create some more like sort of collage papers with the the leftover ink, so just onto this music book here and onto different papers, and I actually much preferred the prints that I was getting from like this music sheet. Like I would have much rather have used these papers, I think, within the journal, but I suppose that's what comes with just embracing the process and sort of seeing where it takes you. Is like, I guess if I hadn't have dunked my journal into the jelly plate, then I wouldn't have necessarily thought to do this sort of printing, and so I quite liked the abstract pattern that I was getting off that, and they'll come in handy for some collaging at some point, I'm sure. So what I decided to do, because I had a very busy background for this and I didn't really want to add necessarily any imagery because I thought it might compete too much and you wouldn't be able to see too much of it. So I decided to do some found poetry by cutting up some words from literally just like the nearest book page that was next to me, and I actually found some really nice little words and phrases that came together on this piece of tissue paper here, and I really liked the little sentiment of it, and I glued it onto some tracing paper and then added it to my page.